Hello, everyone. We have come together here today to discuss the top 7 economies of the world right now. And we are having this discussion in context of our upcoming book, Top 7, An Economic History of Growth and Recessions, with a proffer for post-COVID-19 programs. So the gist of this book is primarily where we focus on tracing the key moments in the economic history of these top 7 economies. And in doing so, we also take this book further by adding the aspect of COVID-19 and how these economies are dealing with it from a policy point of view. And there's an addition of our policy recommendation on it. Now, before we dive into this discussion, where we'll primarily just give a prelude to the book by highlighting some themes that the book covers. Before we get into that, I think it would be great if we could introduce ourselves, since we have all the authors gathered here today. So I'll start off the series. So I'm Shireen, and I'm currently a student at Christ University. I'm doing my master's in applied economics. So we came together to write this book, and I think Dhriti can take over.
Hi everyone, my name is Garg. I'm a final year student of Masters of Applied Economics at Christ University, Bangalore. It has been a pleasure working with Shireen, my classmate, Dr. Joshi, my HOD, and of course, our dear Chandrasekhar sir, who has been motivating us and mentoring us throughout our internship at Indian Folk and also with this book as well.
Chandrasekhar sir, can you unmute yourself? Yeah.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chandrasekhar Katipelli, and I'm the founder of IndianFolk.com and also Medine.com. Obviously, all four of us, we came together to engage in this sort of innovative project where we talk about the top 7 economies, specifically about the economic history of growth and recessions, and also talk a little bit about the post-COVID-19 programs that some of these countries are engaging in. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I'm Joseph Karakunnel, one of the authors of the book we have mentioned here. I'm working at Christ University as an associate professor, and I'm currently heading the Department of Economics.
All right. Now that we know our authors very briefly, I think we can dive straight into our discussion. So the top 7 economies that we're speaking of today is US, China, Japan, Germany, UK, France, and India. And the reason we picked these economies is because they are the most significant economies that are in the media discourse today. And the narrative of the book takes a historical narrative. So we started off with the 17th century Britain and how Britain came to be the forerunner of the Industrial Revolution. So I'll briefly start off the discussion. So what I'll primarily focus on, which I think is one of the biggest elements, biggest questions that come with regard to Britain and the Industrial Revolution is why Britain and not any other country to sort of start off the Industrial Revolution. And a lot of it has to do with where Britain was in the early 17th century, where the sort of setting that they had kind of served as a primer for their economic growth that was to come. So during the early 17th century, Britain had a fairly thriving income level, And they also had a pretty established idea of the exchange economy. They were also, specialization was also very prevalent at the time. So Britain was kind of a good place to set off the Industrial Revolution. And what really set it off was the innovation of the steam power, which quite literally fueled the revolution. And what happened was, with this innovation that took place in Britain, it sort of created a chain reaction where all the other industries, like the cotton mills, canals, distilleries, all of them grew. And since these are linkage industries, it further propelled productivity. So this is kind of what was the situation when the Industrial Revolution was starting out. And during this time, Britain saw a rapid increase in their national income estimates in all the sectors, that is agriculture, industrial, and as well as the service sector. And so some of the reasons that people cite Britain as the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution there are many reasons. One being the place Britain was at during the early 17th century, and adding on to this, the fact that due to the Great Divergence, Europe kind of had to be the hub spot to sort of start the Industrial Revolution. And within Europe, Britain particularly had the natural resources to kind of to allow for this level of for a revolution to happen. And there are other reasons, like there was a particularly high birth rate among the wealthy population in Britain at the time, which kind of added on to the high income levels that we were seeing. Moreover, there are also cited where as we kind of move into the 18th century, the Age of Enlightenment starts to come. The topic of the Age of Enlightenment starts to come about, and Britain had a particular advantage where they had several colonies, and hence you could say that their requirement for labor was taken care of through these colonies, and hence the supply chain they had at home could engage themselves in innovation, which further kind of made Britain the hub spot for the Industrial Revolution, with this innovation growth, which kind of propelled the industries, and hence this is what we see. So now jumping the timeline by a century, we reach the 18th century Age of Enlightenment, which I briefly spoke about. But among the three countries out of the top 7 economies that kind of stand out is France. So France is pretty much known for being a significant country in their contribution during the Age of Enlightenment, which I think Mr. Chandrasekhar can speak a little more on, since he's worked on that part. So Chandrasekhar sir, can you unmute yourself? I think you can particularly talk about the economic theories that France came about during this period.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Shireen. So obviously, Shireen spoke about Great Britain and the contributions of England, specifically as it pertains to Industrial Revolution, and how Great Britain as a whole progressed quite a bit as compared to other countries in both during the 18th century and also 19th centuries. When it comes to France, most of you are aware that France, Germany, and Great Britain they contributed significantly to during the Age of Enlightenment, particularly during the late 18th century. If you talk about the scientists or the technologists or the greatest of the inventions that were taking place for the most part, you would find them in either Britain, France, or Germany, right? I mean, you also have Italy and Netherlands, Sweden, and Switzerland to some extent, but for the most part, 90% of them would come from either England, France, or Germany. Yeah. Coming to France, I think if you look at some of the scientists of the 18th century, right? France was known for rationalists, and then Britain was known for sort of empiricists. Britain was more focused on the practical aspects of the science and technology world, versus French were more on the theoretical side of it, or even the rationalism. That's how you call it. But yeah, interestingly, if you look at the 18th century France, right? I mean, even though we talk about the origins of industrial revolution, capitalism, or from Great Britain, I think some of the ideas actually took both in France as well. Specifically, there was the economist or scientist class economist by name Francois Quesnay, who proposed one of the world's first analytical models as it pertains to the flow of goods and economy. Since France was largely an agrarian economy during the 16th and 18th centuries, this gentleman, Francois, was more concerned about the prices of agricultural products and how they would impact the rich versus the poor in the economy. In a sense, he was his school of thought was called as physiocracy, which intended to increase the prices of agricultural products. Now, interestingly, when we say increasing the price of agricultural products, which sort of runs in contrary to the industrial revolution as such, because the core focus of industrial revolution was to automate things, do this, which would partly reduce the prices of the agricultural products. But in this case, this gentleman, with his model of physiocracy, was proposing to increase the prices of agricultural products. And his goal was to make the peasants and farmers wealthy. And again, the reason being France was largely agrarian at the time. And I think at that point, to the best of my knowledge, France may have, had almost the same population as Britain, or maybe even had higher population than Britain. Okay. But yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of unemployment problem as well during the 18th century France, which would obviously get to the French Revolution during the end of the 18th century. But yeah, so physiocracy talks about more about the real production, which is the land and the labor. And he goes on to say that other types of labor, like the mechanization, is not so valuable. It's mostly the agricultural labor that is valuable, and that's why the prices of agricultural products had to be higher than what they were at that point in time. And his contemporary, another gentleman by name Marquis de Mirabeau, he went even further, and he proposed France returning to the medieval times, because during medieval times, France had much higher progress. That's what he thought, and he was proposing that France go back to medieval time. Now, it's another thing that France had, took another direction at a later point. But really, I think both these gentlemen, both Francois and Marquis, they proposed physiocracy in great detail for the purpose of the farmers and peasants. Now, when the Age of Enlightenment was about to set in, during the late 18th century, the physiocracy, the modern physiocracy, did pose an ideological challenge to mercantilism and also the capitalism, which was just about to come. Yeah. But however, the concept of physiocracy, people had different thoughts. I mean, some people, some economists or even scientists at the time took a different direction, and for a variety of reasons, primarily because of the popularity of industrial revolution at the time, it did not wholly succeed. Now, physiocracy in itself has some other inbuilt concepts which translate to the free trade and capitalism, in some way. But the core philosophy of physiocracy itself, which is more about increasing the prices of agricultural products, it did not actually succeed, partly because of the Industrial Revolution and other factors at that point in time. And then moving on towards the late 18th century, there was another French physiocrat by name Vincent de Gournay. Again, he was a physiocrat, or he was also sort of putting different concepts in physiocracy to some extent, but he came up with a novel concept which revolved around the laissez-faire principles, which we'll talk about a little bit. So in a sense, by proposing laissez-faire principles, more or less, he was referring to the modern day capitalism, where the government has to not intervene. In fact, there has to be minimal governmental intervention in the flow of goods and services in the economy. That's the core principle he was proposing. Now, the laissez-faire concept itself was not, built or invented by Vincent de Gournay, but the fact of the matter is that he was proposing laissez-faire principles more on the lines of economy and the flow of goods and services. And if you look at the so-called laissez-faire principles, I think they're very popular. Not just in France, but also in Germany or UK, US, Canada, in all Western countries. Most of, as I think everybody knows that what laissez-faire principles mean for the most part, which is about minimal governmental intervention in the flow of goods and services in the economy. But the fact of the matter is that it originated within France, probably during late 1600s or something like that. Yeah. So what would happen over a period of time is that as at the same time when laissez-faire principles were sort of getting popular, Adam Smith would come up with his Wealth of Nations theory and the concepts pertaining to the free trade and etc. Right. Adam Smith himself never actually used the term laissez-faire, but he almost uses some different terms which are almost the equivalent of the laissez-faire. Probably because of the French-British rivalry at that time. That's what I'm thinking. I cannot confirm that. I'm just thinking that even though Adam Smith proposes different theories and concepts which are Sorry, it got disconnected, right? Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah.
But I was just saying that by the time Adam Smith came out with this book, Wealth of Nations, right? Obviously, this idea of Great Britain behind the Industrial Revolution and the free trade became more popular, and the laissez-faire principles, even though the term itself became more popular, they're almost this sort of they became the equivalent of the free trade, and the terms were used interchangeably. Yeah, both in North America and also in the Western Europe. So that said, I think in the 19th century United States, right, laissez-faire principles became more and more popular, especially when you look at what Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, did in increasing the power of the farmers, and the fact that it was more focused on expanding the borders of the United States towards the west and all of that. Thomas Jefferson was a big fan of the French Revolution per se, even though his ancestors were from Great Britain. He himself was sort of more inclined towards some of the concepts that originated in France and the French Revolution and all of that. Yeah. So the fact of the matter is, some of the ways and means by which the United States itself grew in during the early and the late 19th century were based on, of course, on the capitalistic model, but really, they were more or less built on the core laissez-faire principles which had originated primarily within France, I would say. So that's a sort of contribution, I would say, of France as far as the capitalism and the economic theories are concerned during the late 17th century and the 18th century also. Of course, we would cover this in detail, when the book is going to be published. But yeah, so that's the gist of it in terms of the France's contribution. Yeah.
Right. Joshi sir wanted to add something with regard to France.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Shagar, for throwing some very important aspects related to France as a country. We know that it's one of the leading superpowers in the world, and this is the second largest economy in the European Union and seventh largest in the whole world. And when we talk about the total amount of trade, it is again the second largest in the European Union. So France as a country has its own unique place in the economic map of the world as well as in the entire Europe. Then interestingly, this is the most visited country in the world, and that showcases the relevance of tourism industry in this economy. But on the other side, on the one side we have a very glorious picture, but on the other side, this connection with outside world in terms of foreign integration that has caused so much to France as an economy. I personally feel that the kind of costs the policymakers and the economy pays currently, that's mainly owing to the degree of foreign integration. Mainly three important issues I would like to highlight here. One is the sluggish growth rate of French economy in the recent years. Then second is the rising unemployment rates. If we look at the unemployment rate in France, in 2019, if we look at the 4 quarters, we can see that it's ranging between 8 and 9% of the total workforce, which is very huge for an advanced economy like France. Then third is the mounting current account deficit. So this current account deficit is mainly coming out of the gap between the exports and imports. We all know that. So the current account deficit is very well connected to the public debt as well. So that's another issue. Public debt is amounted, it is calculated as almost 98.1% of the GDP of France, which is very huge. What it says is the public debt in France is almost equivalent to the size of the GDP. So these are all some pitfalls on the other side. If we look at the recent trends, especially the history of French economy in the last few years, we can see that its position in terms of the economic power, the size of the economic pie, that's been reduced. That's being on decline. So that reveals that as an economy, other economies are taking over France, and its position is going down. So we know that policymakers are really working on these issues, but at the same time, I just wanted to highlight this as a kind of after effect of the high degree of foreign integration or the opening up of the economy for outside world.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, most of the economies that we've spoken about from the historical context, so at this timeline, now we have reached the 19th century, and around this time, most of the economies have already begun their industrialization journey, and they all had something to build off of to kind of start their growth journey. But two economies out of the 7 economies that we have covered that kind of stand out in this regard are Germany and Japan, where they are known for their post-World War economic miracle, because they quite literally started from scratch. Japan, for instance, at the time, this is around the period of 1945, they were heavily incapacitated by the war. They had 2 bombs dropped on them, and what was left of Japan was pretty much rubble. So to kind of set the context, at this time, Japan was occupied by the American Allied Forces. So they came under the umbrella of America. They were under the shelter of America. And this, in my opinion, served to be kind of the greatest reason for their post-war economic miracle, where under America's stewardship, they were able to restructure their political structures, their financial systems, their education, and parallel it with America. So the biggest change that they did was change their constitution. But one thing that is particularly unique to Japan is the fact that while they were changing their constitution, they chose to demilitarize. So they banned the military. And this doesn't mean that there's nothing, Japan doesn't have anything in their defense. They do have the Japanese self-defense forces. But what this essentially meant was that Japan cannot engage in any active wars. And by doing this, I think this was primarily the boost that allowed Japan to grow to such an extent, because what this did was it allowed Japan to free up a lot of their resources. And these are the resources that they focused on trade and commerce and to expand their industries. And in addition to this, there were a few factors that are discussed more in detail in the book. But I think this particularly, the fact that they chose to demilitarize, was what propelled their experience of the post-war economic miracle. Now, along the similar lines, Germany is another country that experienced this miracle. So, Dhriti, could you share your insights based on your research on Germany's experience?
Yes, sure, Shireen. I mean, today, if we speak of Germany, the two words that strike anyone's mind are innovation and technology. We know that Germany is a hallmark for research and development. So how did this turnaround come to happen? If you look at the history of Germany, it is replete with a lot of ups and downs. Like you said, that like Japan, Germany started from scratch. Industrialization process started very late, after 1870. That's when the German Empire came into existence. It was not even a big unified empire like that of Great Britain. And even after that, Germany had soon, at the beginning of 20th century, had overtaken Great Britain. But as World War I happened, no one had expected that it would, a simple war, a battle between Serbia and Austria would, blow up into a world war. It was an unprecedented incident. And what the kind of crisis which Germany was left with was hyperinflation, high unemployment. Germany had thought that, had never actually, foreseen that they would be losing this world war. And they thought that their high military expenditure would be compensated by, their victory. But this actually did not happen. And they had to give in to this treaty, the Treaty of Versailles, which was, if we look now in retrospection, it was very, very harsh on the German Empire at that time. In fact, if you look at what Keynes at that time said, Keynes said that German Empire is not something which is built on blood. It is something which is built on iron and ore. And with this treaty, you are taking away the only assets it has, which is around 75% of its iron ore and 26% of its coal resources. So you are actually breaking the bone of Germany. And what you should actually be doing is try to create a very cohesive and collaborative European economy. But at that time, the other victorious powers, that was not the vision that they had in their mind. And as a result, Germany's economy was totally broken. Nationalistic sentiments flared up across the economy, and government engaged in high fiscal spending. Now, when you are engaged, when you have high unemployment and you spend a lot, this high expansionary fiscal policy should be followed up with a prudent fiscal, measures like taxing the ultra wealthy. But this is not what the government did. What they did was they went on for territorial aggression. They thought they will win the Second World War, and that is how they will pay back for their, extravagant projects. Again, Germany, lost the war, but this time the Allied powers, they had learned their lessons from the First World War, and they knew that this is not what they could, they want to do again. They don't want to, because Germany is left with nothing, and they want to create a more cohesive Europe. And so they came up with Marshall Plan. They came up with all sorts of supports, even though the kind of assistance or the aid that Marshall Plan had in the development of Germany, that is quite exaggerated. I will discuss that later. But what actually worked for the German miracle was it's a very prudent monetary policy. So what had happened was in 1936, they had come up with price freezing because inflation was skyrocketing because of huge government spending. But price freezing, one should understand, it never leads to controlling inflation. What it does is it represses. And this is exactly what happened after the World War II. That repressed inflation, it was all over the place. And as we know that after World War II was an era of Cold War where Soviet Union and the USA, they were fighting for their respective ideologies, and Germany was divided into two parts, the West and the East. The West, which was modeled along the capitalist lines, and the East, which was modeled along the socialist ones. And there is no doubt about that how West Germany actually, it actually kind of, it's a testimony to the capitalist model, because it kicked off within a few years, within a decade of within a decade of Marshall Plan and all, the industrial output, it reached around 72%, and then the other industries also were prospering. But on the other hand, the East Germany, first of all, it was based on the socialist model. Secondly, it was not naturally endowed as well as the West Germany. And so natural reasons, geographical reasons, then political reasons all contributed in favor of the West Germany and in disadvantage of the East. So, but then Berlin Wall happened, the influx of labor was prevented. So West Germany did not have enough labor to, fuel its industrial requirements. So it had its own ups and downs, and then things worked in favor. The unthinkable happened. West and East united in the 1991 with the fall of USSR. Again, this was seen as a big disadvantage, but Germany, it has a history of proving people wrong, and then it came out stronger. Even though the 1990s was a very ugly decade for Germany, because of course they had to spend a lot of money in development of East Germany. East Germany did not even have basic infrastructure, and then mass training of East Germans happened. So if you look at how Germany actually reached the level where it is today, it has a lot to do with its prudent fiscal and monetary policies, which of course are very, discussed very much in detail in the book. And also the key factor that you look right from the 19th century to even today, they place a lot of importance on research and training. So whether it was the 20th century, whether it was after the reunification, they always, considered their human resources as their biggest asset. They have always been investing a lot in their people, and even today, if you look at it, their employment support and everything, it's way better compared to any other country in the world, whether developed and developing. Yeah.
Right. I think that's very well summed up. With this, we can conclude our discussion on the historical aspect of these 7 economies, and we can move on to how these economies have dealt with recessions and economic shocks in their history. So the dominant country that comes to mind here is the US. So we'll start off the discussion with that. Mr. Joshi, can you elaborate on how the US recessions in the past shaped their economy and the kind of policies they took to address these recessions?
Thank you, Shireen, for that question. When we look at recessions or expansion of economies, basically, these are all historical events. And in developing the science of economics, these historical events, they play a very, very crucial role. So the history of recessions in the US is basically the history of recessions for the entire world. Because all the recessions happened in relation to the economy of the US, they are very pertinent to the entire world. Um, uh, uh, when we start from the 1930s Great Depression, then again in 1970s we had the oil price shock. Then again from there when we come to the 9/11, then Iran oil price shock. Then again we have the South Asian, East Asian financial crisis. Then 2007-8 great recession we had. Then COVID-19 related recession. That is the latest of these historical events. And still, the COVID-19, the pandemic is still on, and most of the countries are, struggling in dealing with the global pandemic now. So I would discuss about five, cycles which are greatest in the history of the US in terms of the severity of the impact, starting from the Great Depression. Great Depression of 1930s from 29 to 33. Most of us would be familiar with that. American economy had almost 25% of the labor force unemployed, so we can understand the severity or the magnitude of adverse impact of that depression on the global economy, in particular to American economy. Then from there again, we see that in 1970s we had the oil price shock, the adverse supply shocks pertaining to the rise in the crude oil prices, which marked the onset of a new economic phenomenon, which is termed as stagflation. Usually we see that a recession is characterized with rise in unemployment and falling prices. But for stagflation, all of us know this is characterized with rise in unemployment along with rise in the inflationary pressure. So inflation and unemployment coexist. Now, when we talk about this recession, at times we see that we are referring to stagflationary trend. For instance, COVID-19 and Indian economy. Currently, we see that it's more related to stagflation. At some point of time, we find this as stagflation because both inflation and unemployment would be on the rise. At times, we see that there is falling price level and unemployment rises. So we have recession prevailing. Now, from 1970s, where the American economy had unemployment of more than 9% of their workforce. When we come to the early years of 80s, early years in 80s, the recession was mainly owing to the Iran oil price hike. So that was mainly attributed to the change in the policies of Iran in terms of the governance, the change in the rule in Iran and the kind of rise in the oil price. Then also related to some other global factors like the Bretton Woods and some other global factors as well. There, the unemployment rate was estimated to be around 10% of the workforce in America. Then, when we come to 2007-8, the fourth one, again we see that most of the economies they consider this as Great Recession. So from 1930s, the when we compare among all the recessions, the 2007-8 was the biggest or with the most severe adverse impacts, other than COVID-19 related recession. So this COVID-19 recession, which is felt in America in the first two quarters of 2020, the current financial year, when pushed the American economy into a very severe recession. Now, when it comes to recessionary trends, we have many other minor recessions as well. For instance, in 1970s, early 70s, we had a recession mainly attributed to the policies of the then President Richard Nixon. Then again, in 9/11, we had the recessionary trend in American economy. Again, dot-com bubbles in early 2000s. All these were some minor tremors in American economy, but these five recessionary cycles were the greatest so far. And when we look at the COVID-19, which is still on, although American economy is showing the signals of recovery, we can't say that economy has recovered completely. Even yesterday, we have seen the new stimulus package, being introduced in American economy. So it's a kind of ongoing recessionary trend we see in America currently. But these are parts and parcel of the economic growth and also the growth of the discipline of economics. Because historical events help us in analyzing the situations and coming forward with newer policy measures and in identifying some of the newer trends or newer phenomena in terms of, economic angle of it.
Right. Right. Since so kind of ended it with the aspect of the COVID-19 recession, which is perhaps now the most talked about issue, the most relevant issue right now. I think we can shift the focus and shift the conversation towards COVID-19, which is a big aspect in our book. And of course, it would in and of itself need a separate panel discussion, but we'll try to sum up whatever we can. Now, like Sir talked about the US, how the US is coping with COVID-19. There are some economies that, sorry, there's some disturbance. So there are some economies, especially Germany, where their management of COVID-19 was specifically praised, especially in the first wave of the pandemic. So, Dhriti, could you throw some light on that and how, compared to the other countries that we have discussed so far, why Germany was able to kind of overcome this first wave well enough to gain this praise, and what are the lessons that we could learn or apply to other countries like US, for instance?
Yeah, sure, Shireen. I mean, we all know that how much Angela Merkel's leadership has been hailed, especially through the first wave of coronavirus, and even Jacinda Ardern's in New Zealand, which created waves around the world of how effective female leadership has come to be seen in such unprecedented times compared to other big economies. So. Even surprised me a lot as well that what is it that German economy is doing better than the other economies, in terms of providing healthcare. But you need to understand that when such emergencies happen, these are overnight unforeseen emergencies, and there's nothing that you can, they do not have overnight solutions to such overnight emergencies. So in Germany's healthcare system, the foundation is very, very strong. The foundation of their healthcare is very strong. Look at any other developed country in the world, and I will be further, comparing it with the US healthcare system. Germany has universal healthcare insurance. It is based on social market. Germany's economy is based on social market economy, which ensures that there is a consumer as well as producer surplus in the market. It's not totally biased towards its consumers, or it's not totally biased towards its producers. And given kind of emphasis that they lay on research and development, which is very well seen in their management of COVID-19, because their testing rates, their diagnostics, their contact tracing, everywhere you will see, how effectively they're using current technology, whether it's artificial intelligence or, use of maps and whatnot. In fact, South Korea is also another country which has been highly appreciated for their contact contact tracing mechanism, and Germany followed the suit. In fact, what marks, if talking about the fundamentals, Germany is the biggest spender on healthcare. They spend close to around 11% of the GDP. Now, if you compare it to other countries like India, USA, where out-of-pocket expenditure is way too high, and even the government expenditure on healthcare is barely, especially in India, it's barely 2 to 3%. Also, then Germany focuses a lot on public-private collaboration, and then secondly, it has the highest number of hospital beds per 1,000 population in Europe, and also it has the highest number of nurses, physicians per 1,000 population. Another thing is, Germany is a country which has in its culture, of scientific reasoning, logical reasoning, research. That is also very important. Now, if you look at other countries where the leadership itself is not very supportive of use of masks or use of that scientific temperament, or the leadership itself does not show that kind of, faith in the scientific community, then what can you expect from the people? But in case of Germany, you not only see the people following the rules, the government also posing all their faith in the science, the scientific community, and that kind of worked well. Even though the economy right now, because Germany is an export-oriented economy and it is bound to be affected, like you see the countries which had a deficit, they are now having a surplus because their imports fell down, and the countries like Germany and USA, which are primarily exporters, their exports fell down drastically, and that has affected their economy. But Germany, again, even though it is right now also under lockdown throughout the Christmas celebration, and they are yet to decide whether they will continue with the lockdown post 10 January or not, we do see that they have this particular employment support program, which is called by the name of Kurzarbeit. It saved them even through the Great Recession of the global financial crisis of 2009 as well, and hopefully it will work even now. So what is special about this employment program is that the government tells that you do not fire people, you do not lay off people, but you reduce their working hours. And not just that, the government agrees to contribute the employer in paying the employee. So even the big houses like corporate houses like Lufthansa and all, they have sought support from the government. So these are kind of things which have helped Germany. Now, even though this whole idea whether Germany is doing well or not, because we do constantly have been hearing a lot of negative news. Like today only I read the news that for the first time ever, Germany's daily death toll has gone beyond 1,000 deaths in a day. So of course, news like this is kind of contrary to what we are talking about right now. But I think COVID-19, a lot is yet to be seen. A lot of ups and downs will come. But one thing that we need to understand from Germany's experience is that if you have a strong investment in your basic social infrastructure, which is education, which is research, and most importantly, health, then your foundations are strong and you will not be as much affected by such emergencies. So this is one thing which most of the countries around the world need to understand.
Right. I think you brought up a very good point on the aspect of healthcare investment. And I think drawing parallels with the countries I focused on, which is UK and Japan. So Japan also initially was praised for their management with COVID-19. But like you said, similar to Germany, there are debates surrounding this because their numbers have been rising. But putting that aside, one commendable factor even in Japan is the fact that they have a universal healthcare system, which they invested in long back in the 1960s. That is when they were not a high-income country, which is serving them well today, especially in terms of it doesn't gatekeep the socially backward class of society from gaining this healthcare, which I think is a very crucial aspect in the way the countries are dealing with this pandemic. And if I draw a parallel with the UK, so in 2008, the UK kind of set a precedent in terms of their healthcare system, where they built the global health strategy. However, as we saw, right after they dealt with right after they dealt with the issue of SARS and the foot and mouth disease, right after that they contradictory they reduced their investment in the National Health Service, which I think is one of the fallout that they're facing right now. So the aspect that you brought about of healthcare system, I think, is definitely extremely important in dealing with this pandemic. And I'd like to shift the focus a little bit, wherein throughout 2020, there has been a lot of discussion on the new age technologies, particularly artificial intelligence. And there's a lot of talk about including this within the healthcare system and increasing efficiency with this. So Chandrasekhar sir, since you have researched heavily on this aspect, how do you think economies can incorporate this into being better prepared for another pandemic or another unprecedented situation like this? Can you unmute yourself, sir? Yeah.
All right. So if we step back a little bit, right? Obviously, this concept of artificial intelligence, the newest technologies, right? I mean, specifically with artificial intelligence, AI. It was it was a buzzword during 1960s, 70s, and then sort of it kind of died out during 80s and 90s, and then this current decade, it again became prominent. Obviously, the popularity of AI over the last 5 or 6 years has got to do with the extensive data mining and the low-cost technologies that became prominent, specifically the cloud technologies and the fact that the data can be processed at a much lower cost than what it used to be like decades ago. But anyways, so the AI, meaning the core concept of AI, it's sort of easy to understand, but in terms of the breadth of the coverage, it's so big. It can cover any industry, any technology, or any economy, or anything like that. Yeah. But more interestingly, the top 7 economies that we cover in our book: US, UK, India, China, Japan, France, and Germany, are the ones that are the forerunners of the AI technologies, and specifically, the countries like the United States, they've been using AI quite a bit in different areas, including the healthcare, the public health systems, so on and so forth. But really, there are 2 aspects of AI, right? One that pertains to COVID-19, and the other one just in general, right? So let's talk in general. I think when it comes to the supply chain management, specifically, as it pertains to the exports and imports of the United States, there has been extensive focus on the AI systems and how some of the supply chain replenishment can happen with the use of latest technologies, and how they could face inventory run out and so on and so forth. Like if you look at some of the things that happened in US during the pandemic, right? Unlike India, the United States ran out of sanitizers, in their warehouses or even retail shops, and of course they're not very well prepared for the this kind of rush for the sanitizers and the hand soaps, and the paper towels, and how you put it, right? It's not so much about the lack of the AI system. It's more about not anticipating the pandemic to such an extent, right? So what that means is going forward, some of these economies, especially the US, UK, would be more planned in terms of what they can anticipate if at all a pandemic comes, and how their AI systems and supply chain systems can work together to ensure that the things that they would need in demand during a pandemic or during an emergency could be fulfilled easily without facing any stockouts. Yeah. Now, as it pertains to India, India is a big contributor to the the development of AI systems. There's no question about it. But in terms of usage in the public health systems or the governance or something like that, it is just beginning to I would say kickstart. I think it might take a few more years for the country to tap the full potential of AI and also to implement some of the AI systems, both at the governmental level and also within the private corporations. The way I look at it is, so getting back to this pandemic and what where AI is making a difference. Broadly, I think there are sort of 6 or 7 applications or the areas where AI could make a difference. Right? One is the early detection of the COVID-19 or the new strain of coronavirus, how you put it, right? I know that there is something like PT, PCR, or some technology that some of these testing agencies use for the detection of the COVID-19. But then, there have been a lot of cases where that technology showed up false positives or false negatives per se. But that's something that AI could sort of improve, going forward in terms of what systems could be used for testing or diagnosing the COVID-19. It could be best simple use of X-ray or a CT scan. Maybe the AI systems can better diagnose the COVID-19 or the different mutants or the variants of the COVID-19 or the coronavirus. Yeah. And also monitoring the treatment, right? In India, especially, I think, luckily, I mean, I would say luckily because the labor rates are a little lower in India as compared to US and other Western countries. We could easily hire healthcare workers as the demand arose during April, May, and June. Yeah, and somehow I think even though the hospitals are expensive and all of that, but the fact of the matter is the healthcare workers could be better utilized. But at the same time, I think the fact of the matter is due to the extensive use of the healthcare workers to monitor the patients and monitor the beds and monitor the systems and all of that, the hospitals had to incur heavy costs, right? And that would pass on to the consumers. So as a result, what happened was the consumers, meaning the patients in these hospitals who were diagnosed with COVID-19 had to pay huge amounts of money, right? I mean, as it ran to lakhs and sometimes 10 lakhs, 20 lakhs. Who knows how much it was, right? Now, we all know that the hospitals overcharged in some cases, but part of the reason is that even the hospitals had to overhire the healthcare workers to take care of different things. Unlike in Western countries, we have a lot of staff in the hospitals, to take care of each and every small thing. Yeah, so that's something that the AI system could address going forward. How to reduce the burden on the healthcare workers and pass on those cost savings to the patients, who are diagnosed with COVID-19 and who are in the hospitals. Now the next thing is talking about the contract tracing of the individuals, right? And I think India is doing a really good job on the contract tracing, I would say. I mean, with some of the apps that are promoted by the government, as well as some of the apps that came recently. But I think there's a lot to be done. I think we all know that for whatever reason, right? I mean, the number of cases in India might be somewhat underreported, right? I mean, now, how much they're underreported, we don't know, but more or less, I think everybody agrees that they're somewhat underreported, right? And that could somehow be addressed by putting some intelligent systems, I mean, the AI systems in contract tracing, right? I mean, like I was just, when I was researching about this topic, I came across lots of sort of developments in the recency, like in the last 4 or
I think Sir is having some connectivity issues.
all of them could be traced automatically, so that it could add to the governmental efforts on how it could be how the individuals could be traced, and how it could be better implemented. Next is the number of cases, how many cases the country has, and how many cases are being reported, both by the government and also the hospitals and all of that, right? Which we addressed a little bit a while ago. So that something could be improved with the AI systems. How it could be done. I think there are a lot of ways and means by which the government can use a centralized, AI system to capture number of cases, the number of death cases and all of that. But that's something that AI could be of a huge help, as we move forward. And then even the development of drugs and vaccines, right? I know that there's a lot of news about vaccines in the recency, but even with the drugs, right? I mean, not everything could be solved with vaccine. Like even World Health Organization agrees that even if vaccines come onto the market like next month or in the next couple of months, still the COVID-19 is going to be there for at least 1 year in some way, right? I mean, there's no guarantee that someone is diagnosed. If someone is given a vaccine, he or she would not get COVID-19. I mean, there's 5% chance because every vaccine is like 95% effective or something. Yeah. So the drugs, yeah, I mean, like whatever the ways the drugs are, the medicines or the drugs are used in the hospitals to treat the COVID-19 patients. So with the better use of the AI systems, the symptoms could be tracked, like, the lung infections, the types of coughing, right? I mean, so the way in which people cough with COVID-19 is very different than, the normal flu coughing, right? So the AI systems could better capture those things, yeah? And in a sense, that could sort of improve the medicines or the drug doses given to the patients. And then, yeah, the prevention of the disease itself, right? I know that the vaccines are coming on board, and then you also have some of the new drugs in the market and all of that. But just preventing the disease itself, like it happened in Wuhan in China, right? And then it just spread like wildfire, within 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, the Italians or the Spanish, the visitors were sort of traveling. I mean, not to take the names, but it might be from Italy, Germany, France, or Spain or UK, right? I mean, which is how I think the travelers from those countries, they say that may have brought the infection to other countries in some way, right? And unknowingly. But anyways, the point is with the better AI systems at the immigration ports and the ports of entry in different countries, these things could be better tracked. I mean, right now, I think most of the countries are using manual processes, right? Like testing the temperature check, and also someone is having a fever or something like that, and they would be quarantined or maybe asked to wait for further inspection and all of that. But there has to be a better way to treat these people, right? Like even within the flight, also, if someone shows some symptoms, how some of the systems within the flight could sort of capture those, and how they could be reported to the centralized flight system, so that by the time they de-embark the flights, that data could be captured and could be better utilized, so that the number of infections. Yeah, sorry, I don't know why it's disconnecting, but anyways, so the prevention of the disease itself, which was spoken about, I think is the most important thing, where the AI systems could be of immense help, where the data could be captured as the potential COVID-19 the COVID-19 people infected with COVID-19. The symptoms could be captured more accurately into the systems, and even before the testing could be done, the data could be transmitted, so that they could somehow be managed differently, I would say. Yeah. Now, all these things are still in the developmental stage, but I guess at some point we will be. I'm sure that sometime next year some of these will come to fruition, and hopefully, I think the next pandemic, even if it were to be more severe than COVID-19, it could hopefully be controlled in a better way. That's what I would think. Yeah. All right. So that's the gist of it. But yeah, of course, we'll cover some of it in our book, and we'll have to see. Yeah.
Right. So I think we've covered most of the themes that we intended to in this discussion by jumping a couple of themes. But I would like to focus, especially since we have not spoken intensively on India and China. We could, Mr. Joshi, if you could kind of throw some light on the post-reform growth stories of these two countries quite briefly.
Yeah, thank you, Shireen. It's a very elaborate topic, and maybe one of the key areas what we have addressed in our book, the post-reform scenario of Chinese economy and Indian economy. These two economies are of great importance in modern times because these two are the fastest growing economies in the world, at least in the past couple of decades. And the economic reforms were introduced in India in 91, as all of us know. Then in China, it's a little before that in 78. Since the onset of economic reforms in these two countries, if we look at the kind of growth path for India and China, we see that there is a tremendous change in terms of the growth fabric of these two economies, till then. So we can find a kind of, sudden transition, the way in which these two economies, have been progressing since then. I would say a little about Indian economy first, then we will go back to China instead of a comparison between these two economies, because that might be coming in some of the subsequent panel discussions, where we would be focusing more on the two emerging giants, India and China, in terms of the growth paths these two economies have been following. Now, as I rightly pointed out, India followed or adopted the new reforms in 91. And one of the basic peculiarities of Indian economy is that it's very blessed in terms of resources. Whether we are talking about natural resource or mineral resource or human resource, India is one of the most blessed countries in the world. We know that we have such a huge population, which is the source of human capital. But unfortunately, India could not utilize or tap these resources the way in which some other countries which have gone far ahead of India did that, for all these resources. That's one of the, sad part of our, growth process when we look at the historical aspects. India is one of the colonies which provided raw materials and markets for the imperial nation UK until independence in 1947. So when we look at 47 to 91, the reforms introduction, that was the time period of planning for India, and most of the planning processes were based on two major economic models. One, the Gandhian model of decentralization, and highly centralized Nehruvian model. So it's like a kind of amalgamation of these two economic models, which are in two different poles altogether, Gandhian and Nehruvian models. But by 91, we shifted our focus during the Narasimha Rao government under the leadership of the then finance minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh. We, in fact, shifted our focus from centralized planning again to more decentralized planning. So we have planning fundamentalism. At the same time, it's a kind of drastic deviation from the planning fundamentalism. That is one of the biggest criticisms as well. As in, the model is criticized, because of its narrow focus on the corporates and, a kind of small segment of our economy, which is given so much of importance and dominance. But at the same time, we see that it was a very brave attempt in modernizing Indian economy. Again, it was a great effort from the policymakers in raising the level of competitiveness and competency of the economy. In that way, I would say the reforms were, such a milestone in the economic history of our country. Whether we are talking about the opening up of the economy for foreign players, then again the removal of MRTP Act, then again the delicensing policy, then the liberalization measures we have been following ever since the introduction of the new economic policy in 91. We see that all these were, in one way or the other, helping the economy in moving ahead, or in coming to a common platform where we compete with the global giants, the advanced economies in the world, which are very sound in terms of their technology and in terms of their production methods. And some of the emerging giants like Korea, South Africa, then China, Brazil, all the BRICS economies, and other emerging economies in the world as well. If India is in a strong global platform currently, I would say the most important aspect is the economic reforms we adopted in 91. But at the same time, there are some gaps, some criticisms, and the time may be a factor that, that would be proving whether it was a very successful policy measure or not. Because personally, I feel that there are a lot of concerns and questions on the long-term sustenance of this model. Because on the one side, that has brought such a big transformation in our economy. At the same time, there are a lot of questions as well, because we have to sustain, we have to take care of such a huge population, such a huge workforce. So when we move from a more labor intensive model to a more capital intensive model, I can't say at this point of time. There may be questions on whether we are making a kind of mistake in terms of long-term sustenance. We have tried to address all these issues with lot more details in the book. So I think we'll have some more platforms coming up for bringing these points for further discussion. When we look at China, okay, I think it's a little longer since I'm talking about China and India. China is the second largest economy in the world, we all know. And it's catching up with the US, I would say, because now China is a $15 trillion economy. When we talk about US economy, $21 trillion economy, China is slowly narrowing the gap with US. And three commodities. One is steel, then automobiles, and then we have aluminum. These three important commodities. Aluminum and steel, China's global share is 50%. 50% of the global production is from China of both the commodities. And when it comes to automobiles, 30% of the global production. So from this statistics, we can understand how important Chinese economy is. Now we call China as global factory. It's truly global factory because China has such a huge importance for the manufacturing sector. Even now, although we say that the services sector is growing its importance with 52% of the share of GDP, the industry contributes 40%, which is very huge. For a fast-growing economy like China or any other advanced economy, 40% is a big share. That's where Chinese economy is very unique, very uniquely placed. At the same time, in terms of capturing the global market, China is doing a good job. It's a very clear aspect that Chinese products, are there in all markets, in all corners of the world. We can see Chinese products, and they have their own cost advantage. They have their own benefits. They have their own global competitiveness. That's why it's very difficult to compete with Chinese products because of many of these aspects. So there are much more to say, but couple of interesting aspects. China introduced the reforms in 78. From 79 till 2019, 4 decades, if we take the average growth rate of GDP of China, it's such a whopping 9.2%. So it's close to double digit. And it's such an enviable kind of achievement. Exponential growth rate of China, it's very high, the average growth rate. And for most of these years, except a few years when India overtook China for few years, around 4 years, China is the fastest growing economy in the world. So that itself, glorifies why Chinese model is very unique and why China, is placed with a very unique position in the global economic map. I would, close my discussion with a couple of points more. I think the policies evolved by Chinese government and the policymakers. They are very unique. They are with a long-term vision. I'm just naming two important policies China has and implemented with a future vision. One is their project, Belt Road project. So you all must have heard about the same. This is a kind of massive infrastructure spending which aims at connecting many of the neighboring countries in Asia. So China is actually looking at future, and they are trying to connect to other countries also in the region. That's why slowly they get the dominance in the entire region. Then second is the Made in China 2025. So this is a kind of program policy measure to modernize Chinese economy with 10 key points. So they have a proper vision. They have a vision not based on the present. They are looking at the future. That is the most important aspect in relation to Chinese economy. Mr. Shekhar was talking about the outbreak of the pandemic there in Wuhan. But what we saw was Chinese economy bounced back in no time, right? They had initial setbacks. They had the turmoils in the economy initially, but they bounced back. It was a kind of boomerang in the economy. The economy bounced back in no time, and the growth rate came to the pre-COVID situation without much of delay. But all other countries, including the US economy, they're all reeling around the recessionary trends, where China has already bounced back. So this is the kind of importance of a strong vision for the policymakers, which help the economy to come back to normalcy without much of delay. So thank you. I think we'll have a little more detailed discussion in the subsequent rounds about India, China, and other economies, COVID-19 as well. Over to
I was just adding to it, obviously, the joke about the Chinese economy. Right? I mean, as you know, some people think that the Chinese created the virus so that their economy could beat all other economies. So maybe I think surprised that the Chinese economy is growing still at the same rate compared to other countries. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I know that they're doing much better than the US and some other countries. So we'll have to see, what happens. Yeah. All right. Go ahead. Sorry, Shirin.
Yeah. I think on that optimistic note, we can end this discussion. But even though we have a lot more to say, which we may try to cover over the course of a series of panels. But before I end this discussion, now since we have focused on the historical aspects of these economies, and we now have a brief idea of how these economies came to be, I think it would be a great point to share how this book, in fact, came to be and the story behind this book. So I think Chandrasekhar sir, if you could take the lead and briefly talk about it, since we have already exceeded the time limit.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sharon. I know that we have known each other for quite some time. Dr. Joshi, I've known Dr. Joshi for almost 3+ years, and I've known Sharon and Jyoti for almost 1.5 years or even more than that. So even before we got onto this big book, we worked on other things. So in a way, I think we created a good team even before we started the book. But anyways, the primary sort of mission or the motive for the book is to ensure that to cover the top economies of the world, just both from a historical standpoint, also from an economic theory standpoint, also the current situation, which is the COVID-19. We initially planned about building some of the models and all of that, which I think there in the book in some way or the other anyway. But really, when this COVID-19 came together on board, we got serious, and then we thought that okay, let's just have something as soon as possible, by the end of this year, which could be of use to the students and the academics, the libraries, who to prepare for the civil services examination and whatnot, right? So that's the purpose of the book.
Would anyone else like to add on to that?
Yeah, I would also add a couple of points. One thing very unique about this book is that it's very comprehensive by itself, because we are talking about the history of economic growth and recessions. And that was our initial plan. When we had decided to start working on this book, we didn't have COVID-19 as a global phenomenon. So our plan was to focus more on the history of economic growth and recessions. Then all of a sudden, COVID-19 also came into picture, and we started thinking about the policy paralysis and also a kind of ideal policy by comparing what is existing at present and what should be a more ideal kind of situation. So interestingly, we have a very long chapter on the policy aspect, throwing a strong light on emerging economies like India and advanced economies like USA. So we have a special focus on Indian economy and the US economy, but we strongly analyze the existing policies and a kind of ideal policies for these countries. So it's a matter of surviving. It's a matter of overcoming the difficulties coming out of a global pandemic like this. And similar kind of situations might arise in the future as well. So what should be the stand of the governments? What should be the stand of the policymakers? I think this book is a great reference point for this kind of questions and issues. And it's going to benefit not only students and researchers. I think it's going to be a very strong weapon in the hands of even teachers. So
Yeah.
I'm sure the school, college students, researchers, policymakers, and teachers, all different sections of the society would be benefited out of this book.
Right.
Yeah.
I think with Jyoti, would you like to add something?
Yes, it has been actually a guiding light for me personally, because it has been helpful in extending my knowledge of the theory of my master's program to the real world. As Joshi sir pointed out that, study of US recessions is study of global economic recessions. So my understanding of US economy and even German, French, it has gone much deeper. And like we say, if you do not know the history, you are doomed to repeat it. So it's a great learning session. And the biggest benefit of this lockdown, I think, is this book.
I completely agree. And with that, I think we can wrap this discussion. It has truly been a pleasure writing this book, and I hope you all enjoy reading this book as well. So stay tuned to this on this page for more updates on the book. And I think we can wrap the session with that. Thank you.